I think it's about the customer experience in the widest sense. It's the whole human machine interface, human mobile application interface, but you've got to have the back end operation enabling that as well, perhaps through open APIs, etc.
The processing power of the chip on a 2007 contactless card would land 4 lunar modules simultaneously on the moon.
I think it's easy to dismiss things like the metaverse as sort of pure hype, but actually the amount of investment that's going into it and the number of companies that are doing interesting stuff, something will fall out of it.
How long before it replaces my Forrester Analyst?
Well, that's yeah. I mean, that's very true. I wasn't going to bring it up myself. I can understand that, and it's a genuine thing, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's good, even if it's just for interest and hobby, to kind of be looking at what's out there and scanning. I mean, like me and half my team are obsessed with ChatGPT at the moment, and I don't know that there's any like direct applications for us right at this moment in time, but it's enormously impressive.
Hello, my name is Mark Farrington. I'm Group Vice President for GlobalLogic here within UK&I.
Hi there, I'm Jacob Morgan. I'm a Principal Analyst from Forrester Research and I specialise in financial services.
Hi, I'm Paul Williamson. I'm Head of Architecture at BP across the customer-facing and trading businesses.
Hello, I'm Albert Hitchcock. I'm a Non-Executive Director with Nationwide Building Society and Pure Profile, and now a Technology Advisor as well.
I think one of the things that we see at BP, and I think this is much broader than us, is a trend around sustainability in technology. So I think it's companies looking at both how they use technology in a sustainable way, but also looking at opportunities to take products to market and look at services that they can use and sell to others and build for others that will help those companies become more sustainable and have a smaller environmental impact in the future.
I think one of the things that I'm aware of is a lot of companies are marching towards a platform-based model, basically in order to compete with a lot of sort of the hyperscalers and other platforms that have entered industries over the last 10 years. So the adoption of really flexible API and software-based architectures that allow organizations to really deliver world-class customer products and solutions, I think is key to that. And there's a lot of innovation happening that is building into that adaptation, such as the use of AI, building the very latest customer experiences, mobile-based products and services, etc.
So the innovation trends we see within the tech sector that GlobalLogic operate are really organisations seeking to develop resilience across their operating model post-pandemic, right the way from customer engagement through to supply chain, and enabling that through digital product engineering.
I think certainly some of the initiatives that we see and the innovation that we're seeing at Forrester is very much building on some of the technologies that have been built out over the last few years, things like APIs and connectivity, particularly around data and open finance. That's particularly sort of in focus at the moment with things like customer well-being and financial well-being. I think one of the things we're seeing at Forrester is firms are not necessarily feeling that they have to own the customer and the entire customer journey in quite the same way as they perhaps used to. And this really sort of goes to the same point that you were making around sort of modular architectures, composability, and the ability to, recognizing that you won't necessarily be able to deliver everything your customer needs yourself, and you're part of the customer's longer journey, essentially. So enabling your services to integrate and interact with other businesses, and that sort of more ecosystem-driven model is one of the trends that we see in terms of how firms are advancing services that they can offer through offering alongside other firms.
Yeah, I think that ecosystem-based approach is really coming to the fore, and the ability to share data and to easily connect with sort of horizontal services is going to be absolutely key to that. Consumers have got ever higher expectations around the quality of digital products and services, largely driven by rather sort of North American-based platform organizations that are investing billions of dollars in creating world-class experiences. And so a lot of companies are having to really think how they can reach that sort of threshold around, the minimum quality of a service and a capability. And it is about sort of seamlessly connecting to other services in the ecosystem.
It's also around, I think, the time to market as well of those customer experiences. And we're seeing customers put tools and techniques more closely to the front end touch point with the customer and aligned to the business, rather than perhaps more traditional back end call center type operations operating as part of a support infrastructure. Those tools and techniques are being put into the business and enabled within the business using things such as low code, no code techniques as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think on the pace piece as well, the ability to reuse things that you've already built. I mean, a lot of companies have multiple touch points with customers, multiple apps. I know from BP's perspective, we'll deal with customers in lots of different ways. And we don't want to start again every time and give them a different experience. There wants to be some sort of consistency so they recognize who they're dealing with, but it's tailored in a way that they get the best experience for whatever it is they're doing, fueling their car, charging their car, whatever it may be. And so that idea of back to the sort of modularity piece and APIs and being able to leverage them really quickly. So if you need to spin something up, you're not starting from scratch every single time and trying to build out. I think that's really important.
And I think as well, it's that recognition that building in that modular and composable way and sort of as a service that can then be inserted into somebody else's touch point really is shifting the paradigm, because now you can take your products and services to where your customers
Mm-hmm.
are rather than force them to come to you. And that opens up all sorts of opportunities, not just around customer service and customer experience, but also the opportunity to explore new business models or new distribution models for your products and services, or even B2B to C services and repositioning some of your capabilities.
And it changes the way you build a bit as well, because it's not as easy to build something that you think is going to be reused a whole number of times. And you don't want to try and build for an end state that you can't anticipate, but at the same time, you don't just want to build tactically all the time. And so the sort of mindset around your architecture and your engineering teams and their visibility of what's happening in the rest of your organization and your business strategy becomes really important to sort of enable a sort of a smooth transition from use once, use twice, use many times.
Yeah, and this isn't just a technology challenge. I think businesses in general need to think through their business model, because the technology is now enabling a different approach to business and the ability to work with adjacencies. If you're in financial services, the ability for you to work with the real estate industry or organizations that are building homes or selling services for homes. You can see how there's an opportunity to create a whole range of new services that actually cross over traditional industry sector boundaries. And so I think innovation on the behalf of the business itself, the heads of marketing, the heads of sales in most organizations, are they thinking truly about adjacencies and adaptability and what digital innovation can truly bring to their organization?
I guess it's the role of also partners within that space as well, and startups within that space. And you're seeing, certainly within the software space, a number of the large ISVs pivot their product offering to more of a platform-based provision, to the point that you made earlier on, Albert, whereby they're looking for smaller organizations to bring innovation onto their platform to deliver in turn to their clients. And I think that will probably extend outside of the software industry. And certainly we're beginning to see within the financial services space, alignment with FS organizations bringing in other third parties to their mobile app, for instance. Your retail bank may offer you third-party services and third-party data insights through their mobile app.
I read an interesting quote yesterday, and it said, if you don't have a platform strategy, you don't have a strategy. So I thought it was an interesting quote.
I'll start by talking about how good our design practice is. How about that? So I think design is incredibly important. If you rewind 10 years in BP, you'd just probably struggle to find a designer. Now we've got a full design practice internally. They're getting great recognition in the industry, and they're producing some great products. And what we see over that time as well is that we've pivoted from an internal company that's quite internally focused to one that's really become very focused on building products and dealing with customers. And I think in that type of model where you've got sort of multiple digital channels and you're thinking about how people interact with each of those channels, but it's consistent and it's giving them what they want and you're clear on what they're trying to achieve from it, that sort of discipline around design and human-centered design becomes incredibly important. I'm an architect, right? That's not an architecture task to figure that out. It's not an engineering task. You need people with real capability and specialist skills who are used to doing user research and understanding what the customer needs are and thinking through properly how they will interact with set of products.
Yeah, I think design is incredibly important, and you're right, Paul. I think this has come about certainly, in the last decade and probably the last few years has really been a point of focus for a lot of organizations. And I think it's about this bridging the sort of human and the digital together in many ways. How do you create sort of experiences that are intuitive, easily adopted, and have a real quality to them in the digital world that sort of compete and also complement human-based experiences? And I think for traditional businesses, I'm thinking particularly the banking sector, where we've had hundreds of branches where you're dealing with your customer through a human exchange. And of course, we've all moved online, and the pandemic's accelerated that. What we used to do from a utility perspective, pretty much everything through the mobile app. But how do you bring that mobile experience and that human experience together to achieve the best of both? Because people still want to have advice, they still want to have a discussion, and that's not always easy. So blending those things together, and I think design in many ways is the linchpin to link the human-centric and the digital-centric experiences together.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think it also starts with business operations as well, that design and that customer experience front ends. Because if you've got a seamless and very slick mobile application, but you can't onboard a customer through it because your process breaks out of that application into a manual process, the friction then breaks down that customer relationship. And so I think it's about the customer experience in the widest sense. It's the whole human machine interface, human mobile application interface, but you've got to have the back end operation enabling that as well, perhaps through open APIs, etc.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think it actually starts even earlier. It starts in the engineering itself. So, I remember having a discussion with Stripe, and one of the things that they're very, very clear on is the developer experience. They have a head of developer experience right at the top of the organization to ensure that they're represented in all product discussions and, from inception through to delivery. But even down to the individual words that you use for the sort of element of the API, that's going to be typed millions of times by developers if you're lucky. And you don't want it to be too long. You want it to be relevant. Why call it a PERN or a PAN or whatever? You want to call it an account number or something that's meaningful and intuitive, because that then speeds and accelerates the design behind. So I think design permeates absolutely the customer experience, and that the handoffs and the hybrid, the handoffs between processes and that hybrid sort of flow of processes, which will become more important in the ecosystem-driven world. But it's also just as important for engineers and just as important for the language and the nomenclature that you use to articulate something right from the get-go.
I think this idea of customers sort of shifting left. So we've started to talk about developers as customers of our platforms, and not just here's a platform, off you go, but here's the next platform, here's the experience around the platform. I think we've had some of our design team looking at how we provide services internally from some of like the cloud platform teams and other out to our developers to make that much more seamless, because that's not just about keeping your developers happy, it's also about the speed with which they can get up and running, and ultimately the speed with which we can then deliver product.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you come back to base principles around Agile, Phoenix Project, right? Where's the friction in the process? How do you take that friction out and streamline it and improve the experience from the developer out?
And it's a continual evolution as well. This doesn't stop, and I think that's one of the interesting things that I've seen in my in the last sort of 10 years really has been the rise of design thinking, and actually not just designing something but getting it in front of customers, getting them to play with it, getting the surfacing those unexpected elements that you didn't think they'd use it like this, or there are lots of sort of happy accidents that people have discovered or come across because of something or some collision between a customer conversation or a water cooler conversation that then leads to another use for something that's already been built. So I think it's that sort of constantly being alert to the importance of design and the influence of different elements on each other is really important.
Well, coming back to what you said around customer and sort of being able to provide services and experiences that really resonate with them. I think the thing that we've seen as well from an engineering perspective is the increased need to have really good telemetry embedded in everything that you do, in order that you can really understand what the behavior is. So if they're using your mobile app, where are they deciding, actually, I'm done with this screen and I'm going to rage quit this app at this point because I can't do what I want to do. And sort of which are the bits where people sort of seamlessly step through versus bits where they may run into errors that you just never see because no one picks up the phone when you've got a mobile app and something goes wrong. So I think from an engineering perspective, the importance of telemetry to help drive and learn and understand what your customers experience in has become much more important in the last few years, more so than does it work, does it not work, and much more into do we know what's happening and can we do something about that and improve the experiences that we're giving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also flowing that data to where it's needed, and making sure that the person in the contact center gets that escalation point so that they're not going through the same process again for that blended experience between human and digital, and making sure that you're not finding that data can flow into one system and then it stops and it can't bridge the interface to flow into the next system. And I think we're getting smarter at abstracting that sort of information and making sure that it's a service that can support rather than just an interface that hands off to another interface.
I think you were talking about sensors. I think one of the interesting things when I was at Vodafone, we created the whole focus on the connected car and had a big partnership with BMW. And of course, in the last few years, you think how that has evolved, where the car, through the telemetry, is able to tell the customer service agent there's an impending problem, or your tire's flat, or the engine's misbehaving, or whatever. And for the organisation, the car manufacturer, to proactively contact the customer wherever they are and tell them they're just about to have a problem with their car. And that's a mashup of a whole range of different technology-based services, but the end result of it is a pretty compelling consumer experience. And I think very often when we think about innovation, we tend to think about innovation in a very narrow sort of constrained view, because actually there's an innovation there which is covering a whole range of different services, and it's the way that they've been integrated together to deliver a very compelling and important customer experience.
And we talked about adjacencies and partner networks, and the telemetry within a vehicle also feeds other sectors as well, because you can see that linking into insurance and manufacturers linking with insurance organizations as we move further down the EV path, the alignment of EVs and manufacturers linking into energy charging systems, feedback into the grid, power going back into the grid. All of that requires sensors and telemetry involved within it. And then from within the vehicle perspective as well, the warranty management, EV battery management, condition monitoring, life cycle management of batteries, all of that begins to then feed in to the data set that's captured from the sensors within that vehicle into adjacent industries and technologies as well.
And there's quite an interesting firm over in the States, Car IQ, and they basically turn the vehicle into a connected device using the sensors and using the geo-positioning and everything else. But they allow fleet owners to then manage that vehicle and approve the payments up to a certain threshold for that vehicle. And again, the vehicle can alert to the fact that it needs a service, excuse me, or whatever. So they're really sort of enabling a far more sort of dynamic management by abstracting the rules of engagement, but enabling the vehicle itself to then perform and removing risk, of course, because the driver's no longer carrying, a means for paying for fuel. That's all pre-programmed, and the negotiations between the pump and the vehicle, and it's all then neatly tied together in the information that's passed through for the reconciliation and the auditing. So it really does start to build a cradle to grave history that lives with the vehicle rather than living with the individual and the receipts that are manually processed. So it's we're genuinely starting to see some of these mashups, where different industries, different, people are having those water cooler moments and thinking like, oh, well, I've got this capability that could be utilized over here and that could resolve this problem. And it's that sort of fungibility of technology, I think, that is really interesting these days.
And how technology is driving convergence of some of those business models across industries as well.
Absolutely. And again, vehicles, Mercedes-Benz user experience has every form of biometrics within it. And of course, that interacts with Apple CarPlay that's within it. And that then interacts with fuel apps and all the rest of it. So it really is becoming an interesting, dynamic, almost organic use of technology. But again, that's where telemetry and things like that are critical, because if you don't know where the issue was created, or where the problem, or where the handoff didn't work, you're back to first principles and problems.
And as a consumer, increasingly, consumers are demanding a consistency of experience.
Yes.
You talk about the integration of your vehicle audio system with with Apple AirPlay, right, or CarPlay, and you're expecting that seamless experience to be able to play what you were playing on your mobile device under Spotify to get into your VW vehicle, and that to pick that up and stream it, and the visual display to be a replica of what was on your mobile as well.
It's a great example of a consumer-driven trend, actually, because the car manufacturers did not want to have Apple CarPlay. I mean, they all tried to create their own, as we remember, all their own navigation systems, their own user interfaces, and actually it's to pure demand that they've had to respond. They've all had to work with Apple to create that seamless experience.
And Google, from the Google Maps perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think this is one of the early sort of things I did at Capital One years ago, where I used to work, was an assessment of whether or not we would go for Apple Pay. And the question was, well, do we focus on Apple? Do we focus on Google? And of course, the answer is you need to be customer-led. Your customers have both devices. So then you almost pivot the question and say, well, which customer constituent do we want to upset the most? Because we have to do one first. But those sorts of, the idea of Google and the interesting use of data and information that then goes on to live elsewhere, powering things like Waze, where devices are getting held up, then flags where there's an issue with a traffic jam, or equally, we've all sort of just seen these little features suddenly appear on our phones saying, oh, it's about time that you normally leave for home. By the way, did you know that this route is blocked? We'd suggest that you leave earlier, or whatever. Some really powerful technology underpinning that.
The emergence of applications like Waze are really interesting. So I don't know anyone anymore who now uses an in-car sat-nav. Like most people, I know, you'll have your phone connected into the in-car system with Waze or something that's giving you more intelligence on actually the road's blocked or something to navigate around. And that's almost happened. Just people have found something that worked better and adopted it, and that's improved. Like all of the sensor data coming into it then improves the service more, and that gathers momentum through that.
Yeah, the days of us specking £1,000 navigation systems when we bought our new car are gone, aren't they, really? And then you think about all of the organisations that were building that stuff have all disappeared, I'm assuming. So
anyone still got a TomTom in the cupboard?
In the cupboard,
I think the sort of salutary lesson in all of this is you have to be customer-led. Your customers will tell you what they want, and they will tell you when they're not happy. The footfall itself will leave if you're not presenting the services or present where your customers expect you to be present.
And be clear on how your service and offering and product touch the customer journey outside of that product or service. And you come back to whether it's the Apple CarPlay or Google Maps integration into the vehicle, right? You've got to be clear what the adjacencies are to that point, and how that experience extends into other services, other sectors, other products as well. And I think that's becoming much, much more relevant to organizations as to that, what does that complete customer journey look like, and what is that complete customer use case, rather than a particular spot environment, right? I've got a mobile phone and I'm using that for a telephony call to dial it back 20 years, and that moment's gone forever.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, most organizations are having to think about how their digital strategy and their business strategy come together. IT is no longer a back office function, let's say that. It's something that drives the whole consumer experience, the products and services, and how the company is underpinned by a successful operating model. So I think a lot of organizations are having to think through how they adapt their culture, their talent, their people to become much more digitally aware, and to think through, as I said, how they bring the digital strategy and the business strategy together, integrally together. And that means people have to understand digital. They have to have digitally experienced people on the boards, on the executive team, not just the head of technology, but all the other executive roles have to understand what it means to run a digital business. And also how you meet consumer expectations, which are also increasingly digitally driven. So I think it's a fundamental change for industry. I think we've been seeing this progressively over the last sort of decade or so, but it's increasing. And I think it's also an imperative for most organizations, because a lot of companies are competing with digital natives. You only look at the retail sector to see what's happened with what Amazon have done in the last decade. Most people who run retail businesses are now competing with online digital natives. And that's accelerated through the pandemic. And I think there are similar examples of that in virtually every sector. And so, a digital enterprise, an enterprise that's not digital, doesn't have a digital strategy, I think is, with a few very small number of examples, is probably not very long lived at this point in time. So it's incredibly important.
I think it's a kind of good reference point for digital maturity. Like, if companies have an IT strategy, probably not a huge amount of digital maturity. If they have a separate digital strategy and a business strategy, then there's still some way to go. If you just have a business strategy and digital is part of that, I think it demonstrates that companies have really thought through the impact that digital has on the way they work. Because the two things, for most companies now, the two things are completely intertwined. You can't kind of say, well, this is our business and this is digital's this separate thing that we have. It's one and the same. And I think that's like companies who embrace that are companies who are probably leading.
Yeah, and I think as well, I mean, that sort of convergence of digital strategy, or digital strategy is business strategy, or vice versa, is absolutely where we are now. And some industries have moved faster than others towards that. But I think one of the critical things to recognise is that when you're talking about technology, couch it in the terms that matter most in your business. So couch it in terms of the value that you will deliver against business strategy. So, for example, if your company is really looking to acquire customers, talk about how delivering this capability via an API will enable you to book another 100,000 customers because it changes your distribution model, and talk about the value that it delivers as a product rather than as technology. And I think that's something I've seen work quite effectively in other organizations, because it's you almost want that sort of, it's a bit like you want that business person like Steve Jobs who's got the technology gene, but you also want that technology person who's got the business gene to start creating those conversations. And to change anything, what you need to do is change how you talk about it, change the conversation, and articulate the value that you deliver in business terms. I think that would be some of the advice that I give.
I think when you think about technology trends, you like starting from the value and working backwards. So you don't have a list of these are the 10 things that we need to do from a technology perspective. It's like, what am I trying to do for my customers, or what brings us value as an organization? And then understanding what are the things that are going on in the market that are really going to support that and help that, and how do I get capability to help us evolve and develop those things, and worry far less about what other people are doing and really zero in on what's our value to you. I think that's important. It's easy to get distracted by the 100,000 things that are happening in the tech industry at any one point.
Shiny stuff in the
shiny
tech industry.
stuff.
We all see those top 10s or technical trends, and it's less about technology innovation. It's more about innovation enabled by technology. How many times have we seen blockchain appear on a top 10 list, right? Over the last 10 years.
Whenever someone comes to me and says, I want to use blockchain, it's almost like you could have a formulated response to that.
Bring me the problem, and then I'll help you understand the technologies that are most suitable. But as one of those people in the room that actually writes some of these top 10, we have to. It is an interesting balance from the other side, because obviously there is a whole plethora of different technologies all competing for mind share. And you do start to winnow out the wheat from the chaff. Like if you look at augmented reality, it took 48 years for augmented reality to actually become a reality with Pokemon Go. That's possibly a cautionary tale around the metaverse. But you get suddenly the metaverse, Web3, the buzzwords that suddenly start capturing the mind share in the industry. You do need to have a sort of horizon scanning function within your organization, ideally cross-functionally, that's looking at where the next, not necessarily the next big thing, but where the elements are that are going to deliver against the needs of your customer. But it has to always come back to the needs of the customer. What is it we're trying to solve? What is it ultimately we're trying to do here? And then to work from that as your North Star in that particular project to then define what technologies are perhaps going to be most suitable at this point in time.
I think it's easy to dismiss things like the metaverse as sort of pure hype, but actually the amount of investment that's going into it and the number of companies that are doing interesting stuff, something will fall out of it. There'll be some interesting things that come out of the metaverse that we will all start to adopt. We just don't know what those things are today, but I'm sure that just given the amount of focus, there will be some interesting stuff. And we'll see that it'll be a new type of product or service enablement that's achieved through the investment in the metaverse, similar to what we've seen with artificial intelligence and augmented reality. There'll be a set of things that drop out of these initiatives that will become impactful, I think, for society going forward.
And I think it's good, like as technologists, it's good, even if it's just for interest and hobby, to kind of be looking at what's out there and scanning. I mean, like me and half my team are obsessed with ChatGPT at the moment. And I don't know that there's any like direct applications for us right at this moment in time, but it's enormously impressive and hugely interesting. And it's good to look at those things.
Well, there's a lot of analysts at Forrester throwing it questions all the time. And it is really, I think you just have to be open to all these different opportunities and to be constantly inquisitive, really. I think that's
how long before it replaces my Forrester analyst?
Well, that's yeah. I mean, that's very true. I wasn't going to bring it up myself. I can understand that, and it's a genuine thing. I mean, I remember years ago, Singapore Airlines had an intelligent agent. I can't remember what they called her, but it was quite primitive, but it's actually quite effective, and that was back in the mid-noughties, and we're quite a bit further on now, and the technology has moved immeasurably. And I mean, one of my sort of favorite stories is that of the chip on the credit card. The processing power of the chip on a 2007 contactless card would land 4 lunar modules simultaneously on the moon, and that's just the chip in your card. 3 cards, you've got a 1950s supercomputer in your pocket. That dwarfs next to an iPhone or a Google Android phone. The power that we have available now is immense. And
I do think we as technologists as well are always generally all guilty of overstating the speed at which this technology will get adopted. Right? Whether it's, I remember working with T-Mobile back in the mid-90s, late 90s, and the ability to geolocate a mobile phone. and that was going to be revolutionary, and we could use this and monetize this somehow. But we didn't really understand how that was going to happen, and it's second nature now. But it's taken 15, 20 years for that really to hit mainstream. Look at virtual meetings, Zoom, Teams, other collaboration platforms are available. Look at how they were accelerated through the pandemic. They've been around for a long, long time. And it took almost like that sort of existential event to really drive it into working practices. And it will never go back in the bottle.
No.
We could get into a deep discussion about how sustainable that is, but it has really hit mainstream now. So some of these technologies, I think, will be around with us for a little while before fully embedded in the mainstream.
And some of it's about conditions and adoption as well, because like the video conferencing stuff. So that didn't suddenly take a massive leap forward in technology during the pandemic. It was just everyone was forced to use it, and then everyone became comfortable with using it, and now everyone uses it all the time. And it's as much about user behavior and conditions as sometimes it is in terms of, does the technology advance massively?
It's also it's an interesting lesson. I was just reflecting on companies such as Polycom and Cisco. Do you remember we always used to buy these expensive room-based systems, and you think, well, their business model has been challenged enormously by what has happened. I'm not even sure if they exist anymore, actually, some of those businesses, by what happened through the pandemic. And it's an interesting sort of lesson, I think, for companies when they are in a space where that space is about to be heavily disrupted. What do they do about it, Well,
thank you all for your time today, your insight and the conversation. It's been a fantastic session. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.